to invite Adam Fennessy to deliver the keynote for us now. Adam has a biography in the program, so I'm not going to read it all out, but he has more than 25 years of public sector experience. If there's a person in the room who should know what policy should look like, hopefully it's this guy. Adam, please join us.
Thank you so much, Katie. To begin with, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Ngunnawal country, and I'll acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the lands that we're meeting on today, and recognise other peoples and families with connection to the ACT and the region, and also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of wherever other people are tuning in from today across Australia, and acknowledge and welcome Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are today or at the event online and in the room. Can I start by thanking the Australian Farm Institute Chair Alexandra Gartman, Katie McRobert as the Executive Director, for your 20 years of leadership in Australian agriculture, in engaging us on the important amidst the noise of the urgent. I liked that frame, or as Andrew said just before, the stuff that is coming at us every day, the busyness. That focus on the broader underlying policy issues is critical. Katie, I loved your reflections on not just the importance of trustworthiness, but kudos for showing vanilla ice on a slide. Stop, collaborate and listen, as well as take action on agriculture policy to ensure a viable future for Australia's farmers. My slides don't have any zombies or asteroids or 80s pop stars, but it does show that diversity of thinking comes from every direction, and there's a lot for us to reflect on. I also want to thank the founding chair of the Australian Farm Institute, John Ralph, for your leadership and foresight, Andrew Spencer as a former AFI chair, and other AFI leaders, current and past board members. From my perspective at the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, we lead the Australian government's efforts to support, protect and grow the country's food and fibre production industries. It's a critical role that we have. We can't do this on our own. We are distributed and diverse. We play a pivotal role in contributing not just to agriculture but to Australia's broader health and prosperity. As an economic development agency, our vision is a sustainable and prosperous Australia through biosecurity, production and trade, and we are aiming for that $100 billion and beyond in value for the agriculture sector by 2030, including $75 billion of that in annual exports and growing. How do we do that? We do that by developing and promoting sustainable production practices across agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and I'll talk more about that today. By increasing trade and access to overseas markets for our farmers. We are a trading nation. I've mentioned that 75% of our agricultural produce that is exported. And also maximising economic opportunities across Australia for regional communities, all the way along the supply chain into our cities and suburbs, and with our First Nations peoples across Australia. We don't take those responsibilities lightly. The tasks that we carry out face many challenges, such as more and frequent biosecurity risks. This year was a stark reminder all the way into Canberra when the H7 high pathogenicity avian influenza virus hit us and shut down one of our major egg producing facilities in the ACT, alongside with that outbreak in New South Wales and Victoria. More than 2 million chickens had to be destroyed, and it cost us over $100 million. And now we have the H5 variant coming up from Antarctica and down from Southeast Asia. So they're the daily and weekly biosecurity risks. They are formidable. On the positive side, we have 3 billion citizens from emerging nations joining the global middle classes by 2050, wanting to consume high quality food and fibre, and we want that to be our high quality Australian food and fibre. If we're to capitalise on those opportunities, we must maintain and raise our status as a highly productive and sustainable producer that supports not just productive but profitable farms and agribusinesses, as well as thriving communities. Investing in and promoting our credentials on this front requires us at the department to work closely together more than ever before with colleagues and partners across industries, communities, researchers, other governments, all of you in this room and all the organisations, families and individuals that you represent. So the first thing I'll talk about today is what's happening in the department, and you might wonder, what does that have to do with the future of policy in Australian agriculture? And I will draw out some reflections on that. So I've been in my role for just over a year, and in fact this time last year I was sitting in this same room listening to the wonderful Fiona Simpson and many others, and I think I was in about maybe week 4 or 5. I was very excited to be in the national agricultural role, having worked particularly in agricultural policy in the state of Victoria, as well as worked on agriculture from a private sector and a not-for-profit perspective. Now I've been 1 year at DAF, so I can reflect on what we're doing and how this relates to our future challenges. So my first slide talks a bit about what we've been doing at DAF. That's a rather busy slide, but I'll draw out some key reflections. How do we work as the Australian Government Agriculture Department in collaboration with others to reflect that what Katie McRobert went through before around that importance of stop, listen, collaborate, work together. We have over 7,000 employees across Australia. We have 160 locations across the country. We also have staff in 16 international cities around the world to support and further our international trade agenda. We partner with a very wide range of stakeholders to support the supply chain. We work through collaboration and evidence, an evidence-based intervention to support profitable, productive businesses and trade. And the importance of this cooperation is captured in our newly launched DAF Statement of Strategic Intent, which is this first slide. Now, every organisation's got to have a vision and a purpose. This builds on many years of work, so it's not a new approach that we've taken, but it is a refreshed approach to reflect the contemporary challenges that we all face across the agriculture sector. We've entitled our Statement of Strategic Intent, Growing Australia Together. It not only outlines these many intersection pathways of our purpose, objectives, activities and organisation, but it tells our story, and we all know how important storytelling is in agriculture and across Australia. We've got 3 overarching strategic objectives that you can see on the screen. Supporting the growth of our ag sector, we've talked about that 100 billion and beyond, with that focus on prosperity and international competition in an ever-changing world. Second, increasing the contribution of agriculture, fisheries and forestry to make a healthy, sustainable and low emissions environment. I've already heard a bit about that this morning in Katie's presentation. And strengthening our national biosecurity system to provide a risk-based approach and an appropriate level of protection for our people, environment and economy in what is a very unique island nation context for Australia, not just for agriculture, but for our environment and our community. So those 3 objectives underpin our focus as an economic development agency, including that 100 billion and beyond goal that we've talked about. And we've already seen that depending on the overall climate conditions in Australia, we get close to that. ABARES current predictions, or forecasts rather, are 86 billion for ag and 92 billion for ag, fisheries, forestry. Again, Katie showed that in more detail in her slides. That has got quite close to, in fact, I think it reached that 100 billion for ag, fisheries and forestry 2 years ago, and climate conditions have drawn us back to 92 billion, again showing the importance of how we face and respond to climate in Australian agriculture. So why am I sharing what might be considered as an organisational strategy document? Well, these relate to those key policy issues facing our sector. It will help us as a department work with you to plan to take on these challenges that we're facing in the coming decades. And it also highlights to me, as the Secretary of DAF, the importance of our organisation being a high-performing, diverse and well-connected organisation that does understand and demonstrates the importance of stop, collaborate and listen and taking action for Australian agriculture. So I'll now share some tangible examples of what we're doing, particularly through partnerships. And I thought, given what we were doing this time last year, it was good to share this next slide. This Australian Agricultural Sustainability Framework was kind of soft launched this time last year, Fiona, by you on this stage. It is a very important partnership between the National Farmers Federation, the Australian Farm Institute, DAF funded this this process, and we also collaborated with others, including CSIRO. $9 million has been invested towards the development of this framework since 2019. It was this time last year that Fiona took us through this, and I know that you and many others, including outgoing NFF CEO Tony Marr, has presented this not just across Australia but globally. And I also want to pay tribute to Tony as he moves to his next role for his leadership at the NFF, along with DJ, who was here this morning. I don't know if DJ is still in the room, but that ongoing leadership of the NFF. Why is this important? As a tangible example, it helps us progress a science and data-led approach to develop an internationally recognised best practice process to make, verify and trace our sustainability claims. Why is this important? Well, for that $100 billion in value, including more than $75 billion in international exports, we have to meet trade and consumer expectations globally as well as locally. And in terms of global trade and market access, our sector's profitability relies both on perceptions and evidence-based demonstrations of what our quality food and fibre provides, but also that the multilateral trade system commitment to free and open markets, along with science and risk-based decision-making in the development of ag and food health and safety systems. So I think the message that I take out of this collaborative effort with the NFF, with AFI, CSIRO and others is that our reputation as an exporter of climate-smart, sustainable food and fibre will be crucial to maintaining our competitive edge in global markets. So that, to me, is an example of walking the talk, collaborating and recognising that as well as supporting local, national systems of agriculture, we work in a competitive global market. My next slide will be on climate change. This is my last slide. Directly related to the sustainability framework that I've just shown is that pressure we are feeling right now on Australian ag as we face the challenge of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Many of you will be aware of the work that we have done with you, that by 2030 we're aiming to reach emission levels of 43% below 2005 levels. 17% of that comes from agriculture in terms of national greenhouse gas emissions, and 80% of those emissions within agriculture are from methane. This is a huge challenge where our ongoing collaboration investment through research and development, and I know many of the leaders of our R&D sector and our RDCs are here today, that is critical to positioning ourselves for the future. We're seeing very practical resilience responses to investing in lower emissions, improved water use efficiency, better use of climate prediction and risk management tools, changed land management practices including conservation tillage, soil amelioration to maximise soil moisture. Those innovative approaches, along with long-term coordinated efforts by government, are vital to help position ourselves both locally and globally. And I should make the point too, and this goes to one of the questions raised in the last session, that the agriculture sector under the Net Zero framework will not have an agriculture-specific net zero target. It will contribute to the overall net zero agenda. At the same time, we need to think together as a sector about how we can manage proactively what we can do in Australian agriculture, how we learn from each other, from the best R&D in science and the best in overseas approaches. So I won't read through all the detail on that framework. I will say we've worked in a very engaged and collaborative approach with many of you in the room to help build the agriculture land and sectoral plan, and we're hoping to say more about that before the end of the year. This co-investment is critical to position Australian agriculture as a thriving contributor to the economic and social well-being of our nation, as well as investing in our natural resources and environmental values, and compete in those very competitive global markets. So for my last reflection before I finish, I do want to make some remarks about First Nations and agriculture. We just heard an excellent session then with Daryl, Suzanne, Andrew and Katie. First Nations people have been caring for land, sea and country here in Australia for over 65,000 years. First Nations communities continue to play an important role in sustainable agriculture in Australia. You saw that metric from Katie's slide that 57% of land under management in Australia is now relates to the Indigenous estate. And the Productivity Commission's annual data report on closing the gap sees that as increasing over time. That is where one of the closing the gap targets is in fact tracking in the right direction. It also explains why this is important for the use of those rights along with other outcomes, cultural, economic and environmental, and the importance that we see as this as a future opportunity. So while DAF doesn't have lead responsibility for closing the gap targets, we are very focused on supporting First Nations people, communities and businesses to leverage these land and sea rights to engage in further development in agriculture, fisheries and forestry Indigenous enterprises. It was great to see Daryl from Rainstick here this morning. I first met Daryl up in Rockhampton and the work you're doing is leading edge, as well as hearing Suzanne Thompson from Yakadak. Daryl, one of the points that you made when we first met, and you made it again today, is how you are integrating Indigenous sustainable practices and those centuries of knowledge with modern technology to address the impacts of modern agriculture. We at DAF have been working with both or across Commonwealth, state and territory governments to develop the first national statement on First Nations in agriculture, fisheries and forestry, with a range of ambitions including elevating First Nations voices and perspectives through leadership and industry representation, valuing First Nations knowledges and practices, and that includes that continuum of traditional Indigenous knowledge that Daryl and Suzanne discussed just before, along with the latest in ag tech, such as Daryl, you're involved in through Rainstick. So bringing together the time immemorial and the latest digital technology that we can avail of ourselves, as well as very practical things like reducing enterprise risk through access to sustainable finance, business and technical advice, and encouraging culturally appropriate targeted RD&E access and institutions. So it's an exciting agenda that brings together the best of contemporary science, research and practice with 65,000 years of caring for country. So in conclusion, I want DAF to continue our working together with you and your organisations to walk the talk, to address future challenges and progress the opportunities I've just laid out. To me, it's a very exciting time to be in agriculture in Australia. And yes, we face hardships and challenges, real challenges in a globally competitive market and in the face of natural disasters and across tough landscapes, as well as the noise and the stuff that Andrew talked about that is constantly at us in our busy worlds. We face those challenges, but in the face of those challenges, we've got a proud history in Australia in agriculture, as well as through those 65,000 years of caring for country. We innovate, we collaborate, we find new markets and solutions, and that will help us work together to achieve that 100 billion and beyond for our agriculture sector in Australia. Thank you very much.
So Adam's kindly agreed to stick around and take some of your questions, and we've got quite a few of them coming through Slido, and I'm sure there'll be some in the room as well. So I'm going to make an executive decision that you're going to lose a little bit of morning tea time. You'll have to bear with us because you've got so many good questions coming through here. I don't want to cut you off short. Just noting, before we get to that, you'll be back in your seats at 10:50. I'm not asking you to be, I'm telling you you'll be back in your seats at 10:50 because although we're going to lose a little bit of time at morning tea, we don't want the program to run off the rails. Adam, there are a lot of questions coming through. One of my questions, just to kick things off, was that you talked about those three key priorities there, and one of them is sectoral growth. There's a lot of tension there embedded in growth when you're talking also about a decarbonised economy and pressures on land and pressures on production and climate constraints. So how is the department considering managing that growth target or that growth ambition with also these potential constraints?
So there's a real tension between productive businesses that protect the environment and that are profitable. If they're not profitable, they're not going to continue. We're not going to get anywhere close to that 100 billion. So to me, firstly, that how we work internationally is very important, how we're always making the case for international systems that recognise what we do for fair, open trading markets. But I think in particular, doing a lot of the consultation we've been doing on the net zero plan, we're already seeing leading agribusinesses in Australia way ahead of some of our earlier thinking, so already engaged direct with customer, direct with markets, working out what their carbon impacts are, measuring that. We're also seeing other parts of the sector wanting more collaboration and support to get there. So in some of the climate investments that we've undertaken, some of those are making sure we've got basic systems in place for measuring so that there's more consistency, not only across Australia but internationally, so that we're never at that disadvantage. And a lot of it is about holding ourselves and others to account so that we do attract that premium. To me, there's that continued opportunity in those growing markets that I discussed with growing middle classes. So for us, how do we always put Australia out front for that opportunity? While there's also the impact and cost of more sustainable businesses, a lot of the leading agribusinesses I've spoken to, when you really know each corner of your business and all your costs, as well as all of your inputs, that allows you to maximise the opportunities you have in exporting. So it's never a simple question, but what we've learnt is there's already a lot of leading businesses, both small innovative Australian farming businesses, as well as a lot of the national and global ASX listed companies and multinationals we have in Australia. So many different ways to learn around how to balance that productivity and profitability.
Good. Now, you talked then about measuring things more effectively to know where we're coming from, what our baseline is. A couple of years ago, of course, we had a Department of Ag, Water and Environment. Now we've got the Department of Ag, Forestry and Fisheries. We've got Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, quite separate in the perception of people outside the departmental system. How is DAF working with DECU to reduce duplication and confusion in carbon emissions methodologies and policy development?
It's a really important question. I saw that coming through on Slido. For better or worse in governments, they do love the odd machinery of government change, and that's perhaps a constant. The opportunity I see is David Fredericks is my counterpart at DECU, Department of Climate Change, Environment, Energy and Water. David and I used to work together in Victoria. We catch up very frequently. I caught up with David on Friday. We talk about all the intersecting systems and challenges between our two departments. Our deputy secretaries work very closely together, and there's never a day that we're not working together on things like the Ag and Land Sector Plan, which is being led by DECU, working very closely with us. We're doing a lot of work on sustainable fisheries, forestry, on nature positive. And I'll give a second shout out to Fiona Simpson, that broader leadership where I know you're now working on the board of the Climate Change Authority and the Nature Repair Committee. To me, it's those connections as well beyond the department that help us. Seeing Tony Marr going into that role as the Energy Infrastructure Commissioner will help us as well, because it's bringing more deep knowledge of farming systems and agriculture into those parts of governance. We talk to and work with David Fredericks and his department a lot on not just the policy we do together, but those governance systems and appointments. So we've got that integrated approach. And then we've got that investment to work with TQ on how ACCUs and getting your baseline across farms and our investment in one platform that many systems can work out of. We've got a specific government commitment of a couple of $1 million to invest in that. That's really important. We're leading that work with TQ so that we don't end up with systems that are diverging, that are not going to help Australian farms.
Okay. Question at the top at the moment is actually from the previous session, but it's one I really want to know the answer to, so we're going to bring it up here as well. Who should pay for the evidence to support good policy? How can this research be sustained without being diluted by whatever the flavour of the day is in terms of topics and issues?
So this is a really interesting one. I think Australia has quite a unique system of research and development through our RDCs. I know that on one hand there's things you can say about RDCs, we could do a bit better here or a bit better there. Talking globally, it is the envy of a lot of our competitors, because it's been this long-term co-commitment and matched investment in R&D as one aspect of your evidence-based system for policy. And it is a contribution of public money and private money. So on one hand, the answer there is that it's in a mixed economy such as Australia, we have a public and private approach to investment in our RD&E that underpins ag policy, with agricultural levies that are collected from industry and that farmers pay for, and then that's matched by government. So that public-private approach to me shows that there's a public interest in long-term quality research and policy, which is borne by the taxpayer, and it is targeted and matched by industry so that it is relevant to what levy payers want across so many different sectors across Australia. So while there's a lot of debate about RDCs, have we got the model right, and I know there's a lot of the leadership of RDCs in the room today, it's important to reflect that it is the envy of a lot of our global competitors that we've managed to get a good public-private balance, as well as DAF itself. We are funded in, a lot of our work is funded through cost recovery, for example, through biosecurity and trade levies, and we also work on taxpayer-funded money, so we reflect that similar public-private approach.
So that's the applied science, though, when we're talking about the RDCs. RDCs aren't allowed to work on policy. CSIRO's got to step back a little bit from policy as well. Who funds the policy research? Where does that investment come from? Where should it come from?
Yeah, well, I think in a literal sense, for the Department of Agriculture, Fisher-ies, Forestry, we're at least half funded by taxpayers, which is the policy approach. The other really important work that I've done for many years now, and hopefully it's a benefit of coming out of a state government system, a lot of fantastic policy in Australia comes from our states and territories on the public side of things. The federation is, causes, it's a whole story in itself. It's difficult to work through policy reform when you try to line up 9 governments. At the same time, you get innovation and different ways of doing things that reflect our landscapes. So what might work in, say, northern Victorian irrigation systems is going to be different in southwest WA or Tassie or far north Queensland. They reflect very different landscapes, very different communities, different agricultural commodities. So the other policy opportunities are the work coming out of states and territory government departments, as well as our universities who contribute very strongly to that policy development. So I do think there is a case for public investment in policy, along with the more unique settings in R&D that flow through to influence policy from Australian agriculture.
Okay. I'm going to unpack that federal aspect a bit more, but also just remind people you can ask questions from the floor, so start waving your hand madly and someone will bring you a microphone if you want to take a question directly from the tables there. Australia's federal system can either sometimes hold back or pit sectors in agriculture against each other. How can we get the federal system to work better for Australian agriculture and pull out some of those regional opportunities you just highlighted?
So I think with the federal system in Australia, it can provide innovation. It can also put a great drag and cost onto private sector. So from the government side, we've constantly got to be working at it. So last week, was it the week before, I met all of the heads of agriculture departments across Australia. I convened that, it's called AGSOC, the Australian Agriculture Senior Officials Committee. One thing I saw about 15 years ago that was done through senior officials was a more integrated R&D approach where across Australia, lots of different states, territories and universities were all fighting for the same small dollar of competitive dollar for research and development. So some in the room will remember Bruce Kefford and Rob Delane, Bruce from Victoria, Rob from WA. They led a national approach to R&D for ag in Australia. That meant that different states and territories started to specialise in systems reflecting their agriculture. So WA was doing a bit more in grain, and Victoria and New South Wales a bit more in dairy, and more tropical research for horticulture in Queensland, for example, just to give you the broad strokes. We've agreed at officials level we need to go back and look and refresh that approach to make sure that it's still fit for purpose for the Federation. So to me, there has to be constant work in Australia, thinking not just about what states, territories and governments are doing, but putting the farmer in the middle and thinking about what does that mean for a small or a medium agribusiness or even a national or an international, trying to work out how to navigate their way through sometimes 9 systems of regulation in Australia. So it's got to be a constant effort, and we're about to go through the next wave of asking those questions at my level across states and territories.
Thanks. And we do have a question from the floor.
John Lowe, New South Wales Farmers. Probably comes across the ideal of net zero agriculture. Is it real or is it a mirage? Because we're putting a lot into the concept, and I'm just not sure I'm seeing the evidence to say that we can do it.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. And what I was saying earlier is the approach we're taking through the Australian government framework is not net zero for agriculture as a target, but how does agriculture contribute to the overall net zero agenda? And I think that's important. That's been made clear by the former Agriculture Minister, Minister Murray Watt, I think when he was here last year, our Agriculture Minister Julie Collins, as well as other ministers who are involved in the net zero agenda. So we've had a really interesting debate. There are some leaders in this space saying we should have a net zero target for ag because it'll make us focus and work harder. Our policy is that we won't have a specific net zero target for agriculture, particularly because of those issues like methane that makes it very difficult for us to realistically get to net zero at the same time with our competitive international context and the ever-present risk of European Union regulation. We need to position ourselves as best we can and always go back to the evidence and prepare for those global market drivers towards more sustainable agriculture. So I think it's important that we play a leadership role nationally and internationally in the sustainable agriculture debate, and we've seen the work that the National Farmers Federation has led with AFI, but also acknowledge that the impacts on Australian agriculture have got to be taken into account, as you've suggested. So that's the policy position. We're part of a net zero agenda, but we don't have a specific net zero target for agriculture alone.
Okay, considering how hard we're making everyone work today, I think we might call an end to the questions there, even though there are plenty more coming through the Slido. Thank you very much, Adam, for your insights today, and thank you for taking the questions as well. Hopefully we'll see more of you during the day also. And for those in the room, I'd like you to join me in thanking Adam, first of all.
Thank you, Katie.